Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive with news and views here on Today. I'm still thinking about our last conversation on birthright citizenship.
Yeah, that was a fascinating one.
Really got me thinking.
It always seems to spark a lot of debate.
It does. But today we're kind of shifting gears a bit, and we're going to dive into some changes in immigration policy under this new Trump administration.
Right.
Specifically, we're looking at the lifting of restrictions on ICE raids
Okay.
and how this is impacting schools and communities.
Yeah, that's a big one. And the sources you shared with me really paint a vivid picture of what's happening on the ground.
For sure.
A lot of anxiety out there.
Yeah, so let's unpack this a bit.
Okay.
When we say that these restrictions on ICE raids have been lifted,
Right.
what exactly does that mean?
Well,
I know from our last deep dive that ICE still needs a warrant to make an arrest.
you're absolutely right. A warrant is still required.
Okay.
But you see, before ICE agents were actually discouraged from making arrests in what were considered sensitive locations. So think schools, churches, hospitals,
Oh, okay.
places where people should feel safe and secure.
Right.
But now, with this change, those locations are no longer off limits.
So even though a warrant is needed, the possibility of ICE showing up at a school or a church is now very real.
It is.
I mean, that must be terrifying for families.
Absolutely. And we see that fear reflected in some of these sources.
Yeah.
There's a story about a family who sought sanctuary in a church back in 2018 to avoid deportation.
Wow.
So it really highlights, the human cost of these types of policy changes.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking to think about children going to school with that kind of fear hanging over their heads.
Right.
And speaking of schools, it seems like they're really on the front lines of this whole issue.
They are, and we're seeing a whole range of responses from schools across the country.
Right.
Some schools, like those in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
they've taken a strong stance. They're implementing policies to keep ICE out of their buildings and protect their students, regardless of their immigration status.
So they're basically saying we're creating a safe haven for all of our students.
Yeah, and I'm seeing a lot about, know your rights trainings
Yeah.
for staff and parents too.
Absolutely.
It's all about empowering their communities with knowledge.
Right.
And there's a big focus on mental health support for these students
Mm.
because, as you can imagine, this level of uncertainty and fear can be incredibly damaging.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
It's like they're trying to build a wall of support around their students.
exactly.
But it's not just schools,
Yeah.
right? I mean, the impact of these policy changes extends far beyond the classroom.
Oh, you're absolutely right. We're seeing the ripple effects in communities all across the country, particularly in areas with large immigrant populations.
So what kind of impact are we talking about? What are you seeing in the sources?
Well, one of the most immediate impacts is economic. Businesses in predominantly Latino neighborhoods are reporting, significant drops in sales.
Wow.
People are afraid to leave their homes, afraid to shop, afraid to go out to eat for fear of encountering ICE.
So the fear is actually paralyzing entire communities.
It is.
That's a powerful illustration of the anxiety that people are facing.
It is, and it's not just businesses.
Okay.
There are also concerns about school attendance as well.
Oh, wow.
Parents are weighing the risk of sending their children to school
Yeah.
versus keeping them home where they feel like they might be safer.
Right.
So imagine having to make that kind of decision every single day.
I can't even imagine.
A lose-lose situation for these families.
Yeah, it really is. And it sounds like there's also a lack of clear communication from the government,
Yes,
which is probably adding to the confusion and fear.
absolutely. That's a significant issue.
Yeah.
For example, the White House Spanish language website and social media channels were shut down. And this has been criticized as further isolating and disenfranchising Spanish-speaking communities.
It's like they're being shut out of the conversation entirely.
It is.
That's incredibly concerning.
It is, and it raises important questions about access to information and resources
Yeah.
for those who need it most.
This is all so much to take in.
It is.
We've talked about schools taking a stand, businesses suffering, families living in fear.
Right.
It's clear that these changes in immigration policy are having a profound impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know.
There's so much more to explore in terms of the long-term consequences of these policies and the potential solutions that are being proposed.
Right.
But we're going to have to save that for part 2 of our deep dive.
You've definitely left me wanting more.
I'm glad.
This is heavy stuff, but
Yeah.
I'm eager to learn more and understand how all of this might unfold.
Well, you're in luck. Stick around for part 2 where we'll delve deeper into those long-term consequences and explore, the complex web of responses we're seeing from different communities and organizations.
Okay.
It's going to be fascinating.
I can't wait. See you all back here for part 2 of our deep dive.
As we kind of dig deeper into these sources, it's fascinating to see how differently cities and communities are responding to these policy changes.
Yeah, we talked about schools taking a stand, but it sounds like entire cities are actually taking action too.
Exactly. Some cities have declared themselves sanctuary cities,
Hmm.
essentially vowing to resist ICE's efforts to enforce these new policies.
That sounds like a bold move.
It is.
What does it actually mean for a city to be a sanctuary city?
Well, there's no one single definition.
Okay.
But generally, it means that the city limits its cooperation with federal immigration enforcement.
Hmm.
So they might refuse to hold undocumented immigrants in jail for ICE, or they might prohibit city employees from asking about someone's immigration status.
So it's like they're creating this protective bubble around their residents.
In a way, yes.
Interesting.
It's a statement that says we value our immigrant communities, and we're not going to help the federal government target them.
Right.
But it's also a really controversial move.
I bet.
Some people argue that it undermines the rule of law and makes it harder to enforce immigration laws.
So it's a real tug of war between local and federal authorities.
Absolutely, and it raises some important questions about the balance of power in our system of government.
Right.
But, it's not just about legal battles and political debates.
Okay.
There's a real human element to this whole story, too.
That's what's been striking me the most throughout all of this is just the fear and the anxiety that these policies are causing for real people.
Yes, and in the face of all that fear, it's incredibly inspiring to see how communities are rallying to support each other. Grassroots organizations, churches, even just neighbors helping neighbors.
Yeah.
There's a real sense of solidarity emerging.
Like a we're in this together kind of spirit.
Exactly. People are organizing Know Your Rights workshops. They're offering legal aid. They're even forming human chains to block ICE agents.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, human compassion can shine through.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the immediate impact of these policy changes.
Right.
The fear, the economic consequences, the community responses. What about the long-term effects? What are the experts saying about the potential ripple effects down the road?
That's a crucial question, and one of the biggest concerns is this potential chilling effect on civic engagement within immigrant communities.
What do you mean by chilling effect?
Well, it means that people might be less likely to participate in their communities.
Okay.
Things like voting, attending local events, even reporting crimes.
Because they're afraid of being targeted by ICE.
Exactly. When you live in fear, you're less likely to step out of the shadows.
Right.
And that can have far-reaching consequences
Right.
for the health and vibrancy of a community.
That makes sense. If you don't feel safe or welcome, you're not going to be as involved.
Right, and it's not just about individual actions.
Right.
Think about the impact on community organizations that rely on volunteers.
Yeah.
Or on local businesses that depend on foot traffic.
Okay.
So when fear takes hold, it can really cripple an entire community.
So it's like a domino effect, one negative consequence leading to another.
Precisely. And there are also concerns about the impact on children who grow up in this climate of fear.
Right.
Studies have shown that chronic stress and anxiety can have long-term effects on brain development and emotional well-being.
So even if a child isn't directly targeted by ICE, they can still suffer the consequences of these policies.
Absolutely. And those consequences can ripple through their lives for years to come.
Wow.
This is why many experts argue that we need to look beyond the immediate crisis and really consider those long-term implications.
It's like we're planting seeds of fear and distrust that could take generations to overcome.
That's a powerful way to put it, and it's why so many people are calling for a more humane and compassionate approach to immigration.
So where do we go from here? What are some of the potential solutions or paths forward that are being discussed?
Well, there's a lot of debate about the best way to address this very complex issue.
Okay.
Some people believe that comprehensive immigration reform is the only real solution.
Okay.
A complete overhaul of the system that creates a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants.
It sounds like they're advocating for a more just and equitable system overall.
Exactly. They argue that the current system is broken and that we need a fresh start. Others are focusing on more immediate solutions,
Okay.
like expanding legal protections for undocumented immigrants or providing more resources for border communities.
So it's a mix of long-term vision and short-term action.
Yes, and there's also a lot of energy around community-based solutions.
Okay.
Grassroots organizations are mobilizing, providing legal aid, offering sanctuary, and pushing for change at the local level.
It's inspiring to see people stepping up to fill the gaps, even when the government seems to be failing them.
It really is. It speaks to the resilience and determination of these communities.
Yeah.
But while these efforts are incredibly important,
Right.
it's clear that we need a broader, more systemic approach
Okay.
to truly address the challenges of our immigration system.
It sounds like we're at a crossroads,
We are.
facing a choice between fear and compassion, between division and unity.
That's a powerful way to frame it. And the choices we make today will have profound consequences for the future of our country.
This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive so far.
It has.
I'm feeling a mix of emotions, sadness, anger, hope. But most of all, I'm feeling a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
Like we need to act now before it's too late.
I understand that feeling, and you're right. This is not a time for complacency.
Okay.
The stakes are too high. But before we get swept away by the urgency of the moment, let's take a step back and consider another important dimension of this whole issue.
Okay.
The role of technology.
Technology. How does that fit into the conversation about immigration?
Well, it might surprise you to learn that technology is playing an increasingly significant role in both immigration enforcement
Right.
and the efforts to protect immigrants.
Interesting.
It's a complex and often controversial landscape.
This is getting really interesting. I'm eager to learn more about this technological angle.
I think we're going to have to save that for part 3 of our deep dive.
You got to stay tuned because we're going to uncover some truly fascinating insights into how technology is shaping the future of immigration, for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready to hear more about this technology angle.
All right.
We've talked about the human impact of these immigration policy changes,
Right.
but I haven't even considered how technology is playing a role.
But get ready for some eye-opening information.
Okay.
Technology is becoming increasingly intertwined with immigration, both in terms of enforcement and advocacy.
So on the enforcement side, how is technology being used?
Well, one example that's been in the news a lot lately is facial recognition technology.
Yeah.
ICE is using it to identify and track undocumented immigrants,
Wow.
often by scanning driver's license databases or using surveillance cameras in public spaces.
Wow, that sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does.
It raises a lot of questions about privacy and surveillance.
You're right. It's a very controversial issue.
Yeah.
There are concerns about the accuracy of facial recognition technology,
Right.
especially when it comes to identifying people of color.
Mhm.
And then there are broader ethical questions about the use of such technology
Right.
for mass surveillance.
It feels like a very slippery slope.
It is.
Where do we draw the line between security and privacy?
It's a complex debate, and there are no easy answers.
Right.
But it's a conversation that we definitely need to be having as a society.
For sure.
Now, on the other side of the coin, technology is also being used by immigrant rights groups to protect and empower communities.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, social media platforms have become powerful tools for organizing protests, sharing information about legal rights, and connecting people with resources.
Right.
There are even apps designed to help immigrants document potential ICE encounters
Wow.
and online platforms that offer legal aid and advice.
So in a way, technology is being used to fight back against the very systems that are using it for enforcement.
Exactly. It's a digital battlefield,
Wow.
with both sides leveraging technology for their own purposes.
It's fascinating, but also a bit overwhelming.
It is.
It feels like we're in uncharted territory.
We are in many ways, and that's why it's so important to stay informed and engaged.
Okay.
We need to understand the implications of these technological advancements
Right.
and ensure that they're being used responsibly and ethically.
You've given us a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
The human impact of these immigration policy changes the community responses, the legal battles, and now the role of technology. It's clear that this is a complex issue with far-reaching consequences.
It is, absolutely, and it's an issue that really touches on fundamental questions about who we are as a nation, what we value, and how we treat those who are different from us.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me. I'm leaving with a deeper understanding of the challenges we face, but also with a sense of hope. Hope that through dialogue, compassion, and collective action, we can create a more just and humane, immigration system.
I share that hope, and I believe that the more we learn, the more we share our stories, and the more we engage in constructive dialogue,
Yeah.
the closer we'll get to finding solutions that work for everyone.
Well, thank you for guiding me through this deep dive. It's been
Yeah.
an incredible journey.
The pleasure was all mine, and remember, the conversation doesn't end here.
Right.
Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged,
Okay.
because the future of immigration is in our hands.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another deep dive, and we'll see you next time.